Hey, this is a quick addendum to Umineko Chiru Explained Part 1 and Chapter 1 specifically. One of my arguments for the impossibility of the Chicanon theory in Chapter 1 was that the word people is defined as referring to living human bodies and not to personalities or roles or something along those lines. Of course, I argued that even allowing that the word people could mean something like that, it would still lead to contradictions. However, believers in the official explanation have an easier time trying to get around the red given a personality or role approach, although I still haven't seen an explanation like that wasn't in the end ad hoc and without actual evidence. Nevertheless, if I can demonstrate that during the first 4 games there were 17 living human bodies on the island, then we have a definite checkmate. When it comes to the word people, it will in the end be irrelevant if the word can refer to different things in different contexts, as long as we have a context in which it definitely is referring to living human bodies, and if that context is then applied to the first 4 games as well. Because then we would be able to establish what the amount of bodies is during the first 4 games. If that amount is 17, then the Chicanon theory is dead. Because if the Chicanon theory is true, then during the first 4 games there would be 16 living human bodies on the island instead of 17. But how is it possible to prove what the amount of living human bodies is during the first 4 games? Well, when it comes to the 5th game, even believers in the official explanation need to accept that at least in that game, Shannon and Cannon have separate bodies. And almost all believers in the official explanation do in fact accept that Shannon and Cannon have separate bodies in the 5th game, but simply explain this away using a metafiction explanation, in other words that the rules were changed in the 5th game and that only for that game specifically Shannon and Cannon were given separate bodies, even though that from a metafiction perspective the 5th novel would still have the same author as the 3rd and 4th novel. Or they explain it by saying that Lambda Delta was the new game master and she simply changed things so that Shannon and Cannon would have separate bodies for this game specifically. Even though they cannot actually account for why such a change would occur, only speculate. After all, Lambda Delta is shown to have known the truth about the game boards all along, as she was an independent observer. But anyway, the reason that Shannon and Cannon necessarily have separate bodies in the 5th game is because of Erica's objective perspective. Just like Battler is the detective in the first 4 games, it is Erica in the 5th game who has the objective perspective. Erica at multiple times sees Shannon and Cannon together. So therefore, based on detective's authority, Shannon and Cannon are separate human beings in the 5th game. And again, the majority of believers in the official explanation do in fact accept that only in the 5th game Shannon and Cannon have separate bodies. But they don't think that this applies to the other games. But in fact, is it ever shown in red that apart from Erica, the same amount of people were present in the first 4 games? In other words, that those 17 living human bodies are referred to as people and are stated to be the same amount of people that were present in the first 4 games. In the 5th game, there is the scene in the parlor where everyone is gathered together. Erica is in the room as well. So this would be the same as if Battler would be together with all other people on the island in the same room in the first 4 games. Of course, that doesn't happen in the first 4 games. So how many living bodies are present in the parlor in the 5th game? As I said, even believers in the official explanation have to accept that there are 18 living human bodies in the parlor in that scene, and almost all of them do in fact accept that. So in the parlor we have Erica plus the 17 original characters. And it is already established that Kinzo is already dead. So we have proof from the detective's perspective that besides her there are 17 living human bodies on the island. And then the following red statement is made. Quote, "In other words, the number of people in this parlor now is equal to the total number of people on this island." So even if people can mean different things, at the very least we know that in this context it refers to living human bodies. Because we have Erica's objective perspective that established that there are 17 individual human beings in the parlor plus herself. As the red says, Furudo Erica only increases it by 1 person. By which the total amount of people is 18. This is the total amount of people on the island. So there are no people outside of the parlor at that time. But of course, this may be true for the 5th game, but it doesn't mean it has to be true for the first 4 games, right? Well, all that would be necessary is a red statement confirming that the amount of people in the parlor in the 5th game, not counting Erica, is the same as the amount of people in the first 4 games. Is such a red statement made as well? Yes, it is. Quote, "Besides her," referring to Erica, The number of people on this island is exactly the same as it was in the previous games. So there we have it. It doesn't matter if people could mean different things, because we have already established that people in this context is referring to living human bodies. So even if it can mean something else in other contexts, it is referring to living human bodies in this context. And then in that same context it is applied to the first 4 games as well. And remember that Erica is specifically excluded in these red statements. So her existence or non-existence is irrelevant. It's about the 17 people apart from her. Now there does exist a very desperate counter-argument. Namely that Shannon was standing behind Erica in the parlor, so it is argued that Erica could not see her and therefore there could have been 16 human bodies instead of 17. My response to that is, Erica is the detective giving her the ability to find people who are actually actively hiding if she searches for them. But she couldn't see Shannon, who would practically be breathing down her neck. Moreover, Shannon was one of the people who actually brought Erica into the parlor in the first place. And also, it's not like this is the only time that Erica would have seen Shannon and Cannon together. Erica sees them together and talks to them at multiple times in the 5th game. Another interesting thing that I should mention is that the words people and humans are interchangeable words, as you can see here. Quote, there are no more than 18 people on this island. Before now I have proclaimed that no more than 18 humans exist on this island. I will lower that by 1 for Kinzo. No more than 17 humans exist on this island. That excludes any 18th person. You also cannot claim that Erica might have been alive during the first 4 games and that therefore there were indeed 17 human bodies during the first 4 games. Because of the following red statement, Furudo Erica had no influence on any of Beato's games before now. She does not exist in the worlds before this one, nor does she influence them. And as I said before, the red specifically excluded Erica, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway. After all, the red said that besides her, referring to Erica, the same amount of people existed on the island in previous games. So to summarize, the evidence in favor of people meaning living human bodies, it is specifically defined as such in the 6th novel, it is directly applied to objectively confirmed 17 living human bodies, and then it is stated in red that the same amount of people were present during the first 4 games. The term people is interchangeable with the term humans. And I would argue that it is simply the most straightforward meaning in the first place. There is no actual evidence that the term did or could have suddenly changed meaning at whatever point in the story. And there is also no objective evidence that the amount of living human bodies, besides Erica of course, was changed during the 5th game. This is merely something that believers in the official explanation assert, but they cannot actually prove this. And when it comes to people referring to personalities or roles or something along those lines, first of all, it is never ever defined as such, and the Chicanen theory in general, or a lesser amount of living human bodies, is not even required to explain any of the games. I would also argue that asserting that people can refer to personalities or roles violates Knox's 8th rule. Something that relevant to the plot would require evidence. It is not some minor detail or something. And there is also no foreshadowing for character death or role erasing or something along those lines either. So why accept that, for example, Cannon was killed in this room means anything other than that Cannon was killed in that room, rather than a role getting erased or a personality abandoned or whatever it may have been. So in the end, I simply see no reason to accept the Chicanen theory, nor do I see any reason why it would be required in the first place. And as you saw in this addendum and in chapter 1 of the original, I see many reasons to reject it.